Welcome to another episode of Alpha Audio. It's been a while, but we've been extremely busy with live streams and a huge multi-test. Well, huge, pretty big. We've tested 8 amplifiers, and by testing, we mean testing. We've measured them, we've sampled them, we've listened to them, we've photographed them, and now we're making a video about them. And I have some notes because it's been quite a daunting task to remember all the specifications and characteristics and stuff like that. But no worries, we have a written article ready to be posted on alphaaudio.nl. That's our Dutch website, but also on alphaaudio.net. After we've translated it, you can check it out. And in that article, we've listed all the specifications, the measurements, stuff like that. So if you're not following alphaaudio.net, please do so. It's a free website, and if you register, you can also enter our database with all the measurements of all the equipment we've ever tested. So, without any delay, let's get started. We're going to start out with the Cyrus ONE HD, and we had this amplifier in another test a while back, in a live stream test actually, with amplifiers around 1,000 to 1,500 euros, I think. And the ONE HD performed really well in that test, and it also does in this test. Cyrus has its own amplification. It's called Hybrid Class D, and it's actually one of the 2 Class D amplifiers. We have the NuPrime IDA-8 also on our test bench, and it's also a Class D amplifier with an own design. Cyrus claims that it can make 100 watts in 8 ohm and I think 140 watts or something like that in 160 in 4 ohms. We measured 80 watts in 8 ohm by 0.3% THD plus N and 160 watts in 4 ohms with 0.8% THD. So yeah, well, you know, about measurements, we don't know how they measured it and at what level. So that's quite hard. We just measure with our Prism D-scope. We measure maximum output, and at a certain point you see the graph going like this, and we put it on the crossing point that it shoots up. Because at that point, the power supply or the transistors just can't keep up with the input signal. So we measure 80 and 160, so it does double, and yeah, that is an indication of stability of the power amp. The build quality and stuff like that is okay. It has a metal casing at the top, but the front is quite plastic, to be honest. It is a very versatile amplifier though. You have digital inputs, you have analog inputs, and you have 4 speaker outputs, so 2 times stereo. And that makes it a little bit more versatile than most of the other amplifiers in this test. You have Bluetooth, you have phono, you have coaxial in, USB in, optical in as well. So you can pretty much connect anything to this Cyrus amp. The sound is quite surprising. It's very laid back. It's very controlled. It's very, we just liked it. It's a very nice sounding amplifier. So that's the Cyrus ONE HD. And if you want to take a look a little bit closer, front is plastic, top is metal. The outputs, you see, it's all pretty well sorted. And of course its biggest competitor is, I think, the Rega Brio, and we'll get to that in a moment. But yeah, this Cyrus is a very nice sounding amp, and it measures pretty decent. It's not exceptionally good in the measurements, but it does sound very nice. One thing that's pretty funny, if you turn it on, all the LEDs go blinking. It's like a Christmas tree, to be honest. But it's a pretty cool effect. So that's the Cyrus. Let's go to its biggest competitor, the Rega Brio. And as you notice, they're pretty heavy. Pretty much all of them are quite heavy. The Rega is it's a plastic front, metal casing at the top and the bottom. It has a big toroidal transformer and it's a Class AB amp. One of the downsides of this Rega we instantly noticed, Rega, the power connector is pretty close to the speaker terminals, as you can see. So if you have a bigger power connector, it can get in the way, and we had no issues, but it was very, very close. So keep that in mind. About the Rega itself, it does 50 watts in 8 ohms, and it does, I think, around 100 in 4 ohms. Yeah, and we measured it as well. It's pretty close and pretty tight on spec, so that's good about the Rega. It does sound very different from the Cyrus though, and I thought initially that the Rega will be more warmer, than the Cyrus, because Cyrus is Class D, Rega is Class AB. This is a big toroidal transformer. This is some sort of hybrid Class D construction, but it's completely opposite. The Rega is actually a little bit thinner than the Cyrus and a little bit more upbeat and energistic than the Cyrus. It sounds very fast and open. The stereo imaging from the Cyrus is more laid back. It's quite tight and big enough, but the Cyrus is more up front and the focus is a little bit sharper than the Cyrus. So that's different than I thought. I had a Cyrus amp way back. That sounded pretty different than this as well. So they went for a little bit more relaxing sound stage and sound presentation than previous. The Rega is a very energistic, upbeat, pret-focused amplifier. A little bit like Name, but Name is, I think, a little bit more darker sounding in the entry-level products. The more you go up with Name, the more neutral it will sound, I think. So that's the Rega. The Rega is around 900 euros in the Netherlands, and the Cyrus is around 1200 euros in the Netherlands. So it is 300 euros more expensive, but you do get a DA converter with Bluetooth if you opt for the Cyrus. Both very well built, very tight, feels heavy. Then we go to the Roksan. This is the Roksan Attessa. It's really heavy, but I'll try to pick it up later on. The Roksan is one of the more expensive amplifiers in this test. It's 1250 euros, but you do get a DA converter, 2 times coaxial, 2 times optical, a phono in, of course with the Rega as well, and the Cyrus as well. You have a phono input. Most of them are just moving magnet, MM. 2 times analog in, and you get a pre-out. So it's pretty versatile. The layout is good, and you have some expansion options with the Attessa. So there's also a model with a streamer. That's pretty cool. Way to the left, let me try. If you look around here, you see the speaker terminals are way to the side. We didn't have any issues with the connection to the speaker terminals. And the layout of the preamp is completely single-ended. It does have a big toroidal transformer inside, and it's actually quite powerful, this one. Let's put it on the shoulder. It looks pretty tight. The design is very well done. It does have some LEDs on the side. It indicates the volume, and if you turn it, you see more LEDs lighting up. So that's pretty cool. Let me put it back. The power output is done by a Class AB amp connected to a toroidal transformer, and although on paper it only has 80 watts in 8 ohms and 130 watts in 4 ohms, it's quite powerful. It has a big oomph inside it. It controlled our vocals very well. We measured 65 watts in 8 ohms and 100 watts in 4 ohms. That was at the point that the graph shoots up. we have to put a side note there because we measure at that crossing, at that point that it shoots up, but sometimes the producer says, you know, it's 130 watts at 1% THDN with 1 kilohertz. So as long as they don't specify how they measure, we can only measure our way, and we measure this. This is the clean power. At the moment it shoots up, we stop measuring. Well, our prism stops measuring. So that's what we got. The way it sounds, it's technically very correct. It sounds very clean. It measures also very clean. If we publish it, you see all the measurements. It measures very clean and it sounds very clean, very tight and focused and correct. This is an amplifier for people that want to hear everything and everything in its place. So the stereo imaging is very well focused. And if you want to have fun listening, but you don't care how accurate it is, you can pick another amp. This is exactly what you will hear, is exactly what's on the record. That's at least the feeling we got when we listened to the Roksan Attessa. It's not so much a very fun presenting amplifier, it's just a very correct sounding amplifier. And although I like correct and I like neutral, some people may not like that, and please don't go for the Roksan Attessa, just opt for the Cyrus or maybe the, I don't know, the Atoll. It's a more fun sounding amplifier than this, but if I have to look at my notes, if you look for insight in music, you know, digging deep in a record, this is your amp. That's it's a very well built amp and it sounds very correct. Yeah, let's take a look at the Leek Stereo 130. This is the Leek Stereo 130. And it's a very versatile amp, because at first we thought, you know, it's retro, it's probably analog only, and I don't know, old school, but it actually isn't. It has a DA converter, it has analog inputs, it has even a pre-out, and it has a lot of connections, even Bluetooth. So it's a very versatile amp, and it only costs around $900. I think it was around 900. Yeah, 900. And the Roksan is 1250. So it also has optical and coaxial in and a pretty decent DA converter. And you can expand it with Bluetooth and streaming. But this all has it inside for 900. Is it the same Leek? No, I don't think so. Where the Roksan was pretty stable and has a pretty decent grunt in the bass, this doesn't. It just doesn't. The power amplifier can produce 45 watts in 8 ohms and 65 watts in 4 ohms. They say we measured 45 in 8 ohms, but 52 in 4 ohms. And the fact that it only produces 7 watts extra tells a lot about the power supply. I don't think it can keep up. At least not with our vocals, and they're not a heavy load. The vocal may be expensive, but it's not hard to drive. It actually performed very well on all these amplifiers except the Leek. That wasn't the greatest match of all, and we tried on the Dali Phantoms and on our Bowers & Wilkins 805 D4s. That was horrible, the last one, because it's even harder to drive than the vocal. So this isn't an amplifier to combine with a heavy load in terms of speakers. Just connect some easy to drive speakers that have a high efficiency, and it probably will do fine. But in this case it doesn't. It sounded pretty thin. I just missed bass. We have a sample track, it's called Hey Now by London Grammar, and there is a bass part after a couple of seconds, and it's like, boom. It needs to have this rolling low bass filling the room, and they all did fine except the Leek. It was like boom, and it was gone. No warm blanket to cover you. But honestly, this is not an amp for people that have modern, hard to drive loudspeakers, I think. You just grab a pair of retro looking Wharfdales and you'll be fine. If I look further, it presents the stereo image is very big, but the focus is not as tight, especially not like the Roksan, or I think the NuPrime did pretty well. It focuses really tight, and this one doesn't. It's big, it's airy, but it's not tightly focused. So that's something we missed with the League. It looks great though. I think that the build quality is good, better than the Rega and the Cyrus. It looks great, and you can have it with wood and stuff like that. So if you're specifically looking for a retro amp with good looks and you have a good matching pair of speakers, this will do fine, but it won't match with any speaker. Let's take a look at the Atoll. Well, I have the Atoll on my lap. Let's take a look. Very heavy amplifier. I think it's the heaviest of all, and that's mostly due to the big toroidal transformer inside. And this one also has the most power, at least they say. Around 100 watts in 8 ohms, and I don't know about 2 ohms. They didn't specify that. I think it was 140, by the way, that they specified, and it's getting close. It all depends on where you put the measuring point in the graph. It will make the power they specify, but not with the distortion they specify. That's the whole point. We measure a little bit more distortion than Atoll specifies in their graph. If I look, they say 100 watts. We measured 86 watts on the second crossing point, so it will get close. It depends on where you look in the graph, but we like to put it at where the graph shoots up, because then the amplifier will get less stable. It measures 130 in 4 ohms, so it does double. There is a big toroidal transformer inside, so it doesn't surprise me that the power will double with 4 ohms, and maybe it can even drive 2 ohm for a shorter amount of time, but I think it will handle that. I think this amp will have no difficulty at all with hard to drive loudspeakers. And it matched really well on our vocal. So it has a very loose and relaxing presentation. It just gives me the feeling that it has control. And it doesn't have to work that hard, because it does have a lot of muscle to put into the loudspeakers. And it was quite fun to listen to. The projection is big enough. It did, on the other hand, put the vocals a little bit lower than the other amplifiers like the Roksan or the Audiolab or the Rega or the Cyrus. They all presented like 10 centimeters higher above the speaker. It was pretty funny to discover that. It just put it a little bit lower. I don't know how that's actually possible, but it did. But it did give me the feeling, like I said before, that it can handle anything, any genre, any volume, any loudspeaker you put to it, it will just handle it. And this is not even the biggest model they make, so I'm really curious about the models higher up. It was a very fun amp to listen to. And I think it's very well built. It is a little bit French, like, yeah, why? The build quality can be better, but it is inside. It's very well built and very well finished. We opened it up just to take a look, because why it is so heavy. It has a big transformer inside, and that makes, well, it shows there's no substitute for decent power supplies in hi-fi gear. It's all about the power supply, and that's why I think the League can't handle our vocals, purely because of the power supply. Let's take a look at the, well, where did I grab this amp? It was still in our listening room. I had to grab it because there's hardly any space on the table left. But we also discussed the Arcam SA10, and we have this in our listening room for a long time. It's been on some sort of not really agreed loan term, I think. We have to send it back one day, but we use it as a reference actually in our reviews, and now it was a reference as well because we know this amp pretty well, and we put it against some Cambridge Audio, some other €1,000 region amplifiers like the Rega and the Cyrus as well, and it went in our multi-test as well, I think. The build quality is quite okay, a little bit better I think than the Atoll, less ringing, but the front is quite plastic, and it's with most of these amps except for probably the NuPrime that is full metal, and some other amplifier. Like the Leak is very well built, but you can't expect for €1,000 or a little bit more that they use only metal. This front feels metal, but the keys are pretty plastic, and the volume knob as well. It's okay, but it's not high end. At the back, we see digital inputs, analog inputs, phono, and 4 speaker terms. You can connect a network, but it's not for streaming. It's only for control, like home automation systems. You can update the firmware as well, and the Arcam puts out 50 watts in 8 ohms and around 100 watts in 4 ohms, and we measured, now let me check, 42 and 64. That's funny. It doesn't really double. It didn't say it in the specs as well. It says 50 and 85, but we can make 85, but then the distortion will shoot up. It's not really on spec with that, but it does sound really nice, and we already knew that. Like I wrote down, it remains a very pleasant device to listen to. It can have some more body in the bass, and we already knew that. It's not a really round, warm sounding amplifier. It tends to be neutral with a bit of a, it doesn't have the grunt in the bass. You have to get an SA20 or SA30 to get that grunt in the bass. Especially if we compare it to the other amplifiers that do have the grunt, like the Audiolab or the Atoll, and especially the Cyrus. Cyrus is a little bit of a warm sounding amp if you compare them to the rest. But the SA10 is not warm sounding. It never was actually. Arcam was never a really warm sounding amplifier, and it remains that. It's just the Arcam signature. It's more focused on rhythm and speed and maybe detail. It does present very big and airy, and I think the focus is really well done. And it in terms of stereo imaging, it performs really well in this price class. One of the better amps in terms of imaging. They sent us the Audiolab with Play-Fi. We didn't test Play-Fi. We already know Play-Fi. It's horrible. But the amp section is exactly the same. And what we do like about Audiolab is their amplifiers. Actually, my colleague Jeffrey used one for a year as a reference. And I can get that because back then we liked it and we still like it. If I take a look at the specs, it's only $849. It's one of the cheapest. It is the cheapest. Holy moly. One of the cheapest amplifiers in this test. They say 50 watts in 8 ohms, 75 watts in 4 ohms. We measured 50 and 70. So that's quite spot on. And if I look at the sound, we listen to it. The build quality is good but not special. It's a pretty boring amp to look at, but it's well built. It's damped. The sound is pretty much neutral. The focus is a little bit more forward with less depth than, for example, an Atoll or an Arcam. They do better in stereo imaging. But if you consider the price, the Arcam is 900 euros, the Atoll is 1150. This is 849. You do get a DA converter, I think. Yeah, you do get a DA converter. And the only thing that we were missing a little bit is the depth in the stereo image. It's forward focused, it's pretty airy, it's pretty 3D, but you get a lack of imaging in the depth, like behind the loudspeakers. But it's a real, yeah, you know, you can grab this app and pair it with pretty much every loudspeaker you like, because it has a very neutral sounding signature. It doesn't have a character in the sense like the Leak or the Rega or the Cyrus. It feels like a Roksan in that perspective, but the Roksan does offer more. It's more correct. The stereo imaging is a little bit better. So overall you get a step up if you go for the Roksan, but you pay more. So if you want a budget amp that performs really well, I think the Audiolab is a great choice. So that's the Audiolab for you. We still like it. Then the NuPrime. The NuPrime is an amplifier that we didn't know. We knew NuPrime from a streamer. It was a good deal for the money. And now they send us this amplifier. It is an own Class D design. And well, Cyrus calls it hybrid digital, doesn't say anything, but we know that NuPrime really designs their own amplification. And of course we knew New Force. Way back we tested some, I don't know, headphone amps, and NuPrime is a different company with some heritage in New Force. I don't know how it is exactly, but that's what I discovered. It's a very compact amplifier. It is really well built. It's tight. It feels good. It feels like a rock. I think if you throw this to a car, it will get out in one piece and the car will have a serious dent. The buttons are push and rotation. You get sub out, one analog input, 3 digital inputs, USB, coaxial and optical, and there is an expansion for Bluetooth, but I read on their website that it's not available anymore. That's too bad. Like I said, it's Class D. It's a switch mode power supply. I think if I look at the spectra, the FFTs on the Prism, they say 100 watts in 4 ohms and 100 watts in 8 ohms, and it's pretty close. I think we measured around 90 in 8 ohms and 110 in 4 ohms. So if you average that, you get around 100 watts. But it had to burn in, so we only listened to it very short. So I can't really say about how it performs yet, but we will put it in the review, of course, and we have all the measurements and the photos already in-house. So the first impression was powerful and very speedy, but there was still some harshness because it was brand new and out of the box. So it's not fair to say something about the sound quality yet, but it will be in the review. So these were all 8 amplifiers we tested and measured and stuff like that. All these samples will be in the review as well. We'll post it as soon as possible, but we wanted to make a video about it so you can already have a small taste about this amplifier test. Thank you for watching and see you next time. Bye bye.